So we are really happy to have Nancy Rosenberg back with us for our Autism 200 class tonight. She's a doctor of special education, and she has her board-certified behavior analyst. She is a board-certified behavior analyst. She's been spending the last 4 years at the University of Washington directing a research grant which examines intervention targeting social skills and reading schools in the public schools. She also does consulting and training for school districts and parents around educational interventions and challenging behaviors. And she also has a 20-year-old son with autism. Please welcome Nancy. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see everybody here. I've been doing this 200 series talk for quite a few years now, and I always love doing it. I love the fact that we get people here in this room, but also the fact that we can reach people all over the state that are logging in using the technology. So challenging behaviors is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It is what I focused on during my PhD, and the reason I focused on it during my PhD is because I was living and breathing it at home for many years. As Jim mentioned, I have a son with autism, fairly severe autism, and in his younger years we struggled with just about every challenging behavior that is out there. It was especially bad at school, but also at home. And it was definitely to the point that when he started getting bigger, and not that much bigger, but when he started getting 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, and he was really strong, I just started seeing a future where I really felt like as soon as he got bigger than me or stronger than me, that either A, we weren't going to be able to keep him at home, or B, I was going to become a prisoner in my home because I'd be afraid to take him out anywhere where I couldn't handle him if he had a meltdown or if he started getting aggressive or whatever. And so I did what any normal mother would do in such a situation. I decided to go back and get my PhD and figure this out. So that's what I did. And I was lucky enough the first year of my doctoral program to come in at a time when they had just gotten a grant to educate and teach PhD students about positive behavior support. And positive behavior support is the framework we're going to be using to talk about challenging behaviors tonight. Because Brian was my homework. Brian's the name of my son. And everything I was learning, I was going home and implementing at home and trying and teaching them at school how to do it. And it was working. Just kind of one strategy at a time, things started to get better. And so I was at the same time learning about all the research behind it and kind of that more academic approach to it. But I didn't become a believer because I was reading lots of research about it. I became a believer because I was seeing how it could change life for a family at home. So that's kind of my personal story about positive behavior support. So positive behavior support is a huge topic, and we could easily do a 3-day, and I do a 3-day workshop on it. So my challenge tonight was to figure out, okay, I have an hour and a half. What are the most important things? What are the things that I think are most likely to help you in this hour and a half? And so I picked and chose what I thought were the things that I thought were going to be most helpful. So there's 3 big ideas of positive behavior support that I want you to come away with, and that I decided we're going to focus on tonight. The first is the idea that behavior serves a function, and we'll talk about what that means. It's a core idea underlying positive behavior support. then the idea that once you know the function, you try to replace the behavior with something that serves that same function. And so we're going to talk about that. And then the final thing that we're going to look at is there's a belief in positive behavior support that we're going to have better results if we focus on preventing the behavior from happening in the first place rather than focusing on what to do after the behavior happens. And the reason we do that is not necessarily just because we think it's nicer or more positive, but because we've learned over quite a few decades now of trying to deal with challenging behaviors in kids with disabilities and doing research on it, that after the behavior happens, there's not often really a lot of good options. And people, when I come into a school or come in to help a family, that's what they want to know. They want to know, well, what do I do if he's flopped on the floor? Or what do I do when he comes after me and is attacking me? And the bummer is that there's not really good answers to that question. We kind of get through it, but as far as solving the behavior problem for the long term, there's no good options to what you do after the behaviors happen. And so we shifted the focus to, well, if there's not good options, what can we do to prevent the behavior from happening in the first place? And so that's going to be the final focus of our hour and a half. Because I have a lot to cover, I thought about this ahead of time. I love to get questions from people, but I'm going to suggest that we keep questions to the end, and I will try to get through soon enough to have time for it, and I will also stay as long as people want me to answer questions. But I know just from experience doing these talks that getting questions in between, we could get like a quarter of the way through the lecture while I try to answer questions. So that's the plan for tonight. So this first idea that behavior serves a function, what this idea is that years of study of human behavior in general, nothing to do with challenging behaviors or disabilities, tells us that if somebody is repeatedly engaging in a behavior, continuing to engage in a behavior, they're doing it because it's getting reinforced for them in some way. Again, all human behavior. Forget about challenging behaviors for a minute. So, for example, you may have experienced this at work. If you're at work, if you're going the extra mile and doing lots of extra things, and you get praise for it, you get kudos, maybe you get bonuses, you're more likely to continue to do that. But if you're going the extra mile at work, nobody's noticing it, nobody's acknowledging it, nobody else is doing anything, what we know is that over time, your going the extra mile is going to start decreasing. That behavior is going to stop. I had an interesting example of this in my own life, kind of seeing this play out. When my kids were little, we moved to New York for a couple years. I don't know, any of you have lived in New York or on the East Coast? I don't know if you'll experience this or recognize this or not. But something that I found when I was there is that on the West Coast, I'd grown up in the Pacific Northwest, when you like make eye contact with somebody on the street as you pass them by, you smile at each other. That's just what you do, and they smile back. When you're dealing with the cashier at the drugstore or the grocery store, you smile at them, they smile back. You might exchange a pleasantry. What I found, at least where we lived in New York, that people didn't do that. That you smile at somebody and they don't smile back. At most of these little exchanges, I noticed it a lot at the toll booths. There was lots of toll booths, and at first when I'd give them my money, I'd smile and say, "How's your day going?" and got this kind of really flat, unsmiling response. And same with cashiers. And what happened over the 2 years that we lived there is I gradually stopped doing that. I became a New Yorker. I stopped making eye contact. I stopped smiling as much because it was never getting reinforced for me. And then I came back here, and it took a while, but after people started doing it with me, I started doing it more because people would acknowledge it and go back. So just in general, that's the way behavior works, that things that aren't getting reinforced go away, and things that are getting reinforced behaviors keep going or increase. So what does this have to do with challenging behaviors? Well, what it means is that if your child or your student is continuing to engage in a behavior, if it's been happening more than once, it must be getting reinforced in some way. That somehow this behavior is working for them. It's getting them something they need. And what that need is what we call the function of the behavior. The function of the behavior is what's reinforcing it. And what we know from now almost probably 40 years of research is that this function, as far as we know, always falls into one of two big categories. Behaviors to escape or avoid something, or behaviors to obtain something. So kids engage in behaviors to escape demands, to escape activities, to escape people, sometimes to escape something internal, like a child who might start hitting their head because they have an earache or a headache that they're trying to get rid of. Or to obtain something, to obtain attention, to obtain help, to obtain activities. Whoops, I just turned that off. So some examples to kind of make it more concrete, things that we see all the time, especially with kids on the autism spectrum. We tend to see a lot of escape and avoidance behaviors because a lot of times kids with autism just don't want to do the things that typically developing people do for whatever reason, because they don't understand what's being asked, because they don't have the natural motivation to do it, or whatever. But for instance, one example would be a child who scratches to avoid brushing teeth or hair. And again, if they're doing it to escape it, it means that at least some of the time it's working for them. Okay? The function means that whatever they're doing it for, at least some of the time is working for them. At least some of the time this child, through scratching, gets you to just say, okay, I think we just will have a little rat's nest in the hair because I just can't deal with this right now. A child throws food at the dinner table to get to leave. So you see this, there's a rule at the dinner table. If somebody throws food, they need to leave the table. And you're thinking of it as a punishment. But remember, if a behavior is continuing, it must be getting reinforced. So if every time your child throws food at the dinner table, they have to leave the dinner table, and they continue to throw food, it happens again, that means that getting to leave the dinner table is reinforcing that behavior. So one of the things about function is that you think about what's happening after the behavior, and you have to let go of any preconceived notions of what's good and what's bad. Because a lot of times what we might be doing to punish the behavior, what we think is punishing the behavior, if the behavior keeps happening, is actually reinforcing it. And we see that a lot with kids with autism and the use of timeout. A child at school who, when they hit somebody or they act up, they get put in timeout. Well, if the child keeps doing that, if they keep getting put in timeout, again, a behavior that continues is getting reinforced in some way. That must mean that they're getting reinforced by timeout, that they actually would prefer timeout to whatever they were being asked to do in the first place. And you see that a lot with kids with autism. We think that timeout's going to be aversive to kids, But a lot of times to a child with autism, it's often offering them escape from something that they want to do even less. A child flops down when it's time to come in from the backyard, because if not, I had a child who was a flopper, and they weigh like 40 times their normal weight when they're flopped down, and he loves being in the backyard and was trying to avoid coming inside. A child bangs their head at the therapy table during difficult tasks. And I've seen this. There's nothing to get people backing off more quickly than a child who starts some sort of self-injurious behavior, right? It's really hard for people to see. And so they back off on their demands. And the child learns this is a really effective way to escape the demand. I just start hitting my head. So that they're getting reinforced for hitting their head by having people back down. To escape interaction, a child hits other kids to get them to leave. Again, a classic thing where you see a child is playing with their preferred toy and they don't want anybody else to play with it, and somebody comes and tries to play with them, or they're playing something. A lot of times with the child with autism, they're playing with something exactly the way they want to play with it. You know, they have their ritual. Another child comes to join. They try to hit that other child. The other child leaves. The child with autism has just been reinforced. They're escaping interaction with that behavior, so that behavior continues. Escape internal discomfort, I mentioned that. So how many of you think that you have seen escape behavior in your child or student or whoever you work with? Yeah, most of you. Because again, it's very common with kids with autism. So examples of behaviors to obtain. So we talk about behaviors to obtain a tangible. So a tangible is a thing or an activity. So a child who screams to get their favorite food. They want something, they start screaming, and to get them to be quiet, you give them the food, they stop screaming, they got the food. They've learned that screaming is an effective way to get it. And you totally see this in typically developing kids also. Think of the child at the line in the grocery store. You know, they so kindly put all of that candy up right next to the checkout. The child sitting there in the cart, they start throwing a fit, wanting something from the candy display, and mom or dad is embarrassed because everybody's looking, and okay, be quiet, and gives them the candy. They've learned, so a behavior can be reinforced just in one situation. The child learns out in public, this behavior works for me. Screaming gets me what I want. Maybe at home it doesn't, but I know in this situation it will get reinforced. A child who tantrums to watch a video. So another thing when you're starting to think about function, because every behavior you're seeing has a function. The child is getting reinforced somehow. One of the things to think about is that it doesn't have to happen every time in order for the behavior to continue. You don't have to get reinforced every time you do something. At work, you don't have to get reinforced every time you go the extra mile. As long as some of the time your boss throws you a compliment, you'll keep doing it. So the child tantruming to watch the video, what happens, we're all human, we're all tired. A lot of times we'll hold tough, not get them what they want, but every once in a while we just can't deal with the tantrum tonight, and we let them watch the video, and it gets reinforced and the behavior continues. To obtain attention, a child hits a sibling to get parent attention. There's 2 points that this one brings up. One is that just like with escape and things like timeouts, you have to let go of the idea that, well, that's a punishment. It can't be reinforcing it. Again, if it's the thing that's happening after it, it can. Same with attention. Like, a lot of times somebody will say, well, you know, I come and I speak very sternly to him and I tell him that is not okay. Well, if that's what's happening, every time your child hits their sibling, you come running and you give them a lecture about it not being okay to hit your sibling, and he keeps hitting his sibling, then that's reinforcing it. Even a lot of times your attention is reinforcing the child, even if you're thinking of it as negative, as like a lecture or yelling at them or whatever. There's lots of kids who still are getting reinforced. They'll take the attention in whatever guise it comes in. A child starts screaming because they can't open the bubble jar. So a child learns it's a really effective way to get somebody to come over and help me is to just start screeching. And they get reinforced because somebody comes over. And we also, in the obtain category, we have behaviors, there's lots of these in kids with autism, where they're getting reinforced just by internal stimulation. So these are what we call the self-stimulatory behaviors. So sometimes a child's flapping their hands, not because they're trying to get out of anything, not because they're trying to get your attention, just because it feels good inside. We also call it automatic reinforcement, that they're getting reinforced automatically inside. So how many of you think you've seen a behavior to obtain something? So a lot of you for that also. Yep. So why do we care? So hopefully you're convinced the behavior has a function. Well, why do we care about the function? For a couple reasons. One is so that we can teach an appropriate alternative. I mentioned that that's the second big idea of positive behavior support. So you can call it a function. You can also think of it as a need that's getting met. That child has a need, that they have a need to get out of this interaction. They have a need to get some attention. I fully concede that we may not always like that need. We want them to do what we want them to do, not get out of it. But they're telling us with their behavior that they have a need to escape this or to obtain something. And we're going to try to teach them an appropriate way to get that need met. Even though it may not be what we want them to do, we're still acknowledging you have this need and we're going to teach you an appropriate way to communicate it. So that's one of the reasons, and we're going to talk more about that. And also so we can do what I call minimize, maximize, which is, so the function is what's reinforcing the behavior. Again, I'll keep repeating the mantra that something is reinforcing the behavior, and that's the function. If we want to get rid of the behavior, we want to at least try to minimize that. A lot of times, there's nothing we can do about it. So for instance, if our child is hitting his sibling for adult attention because they know it's a great way for you to stop doing whatever you were trying to get done and run over and pay attention, we can't say, well, you know, we're just going to ignore it. We're going to ignore him walloping on his sibling because I don't want to reinforce him with attention. We may not be able to stop it altogether, but if we get it that our attention is reinforcing the behavior, we can at least minimize it. We can run over and try to, for instance, give our attention to the other sibling and try to really minimize the attention that we're giving to the child who did the hitting. So we want to minimize the reinforcement for the problem behavior and maximize the reinforcement for the appropriate behavior. And I'm going to talk about teaching an appropriate behavior. So figuring out the function. So there's a whole process called functional behavior assessment. I teach a 10-week class on it at the UW on how to figure out the function. So just so you know, it can be a long, complicated process, but But sometimes it can just be really simple and clear. And I want to kind of give you the knowledge to at least figure out the really simple and clear functions, especially when you know the child really well. So what you want to think about is next time the child engages in the behavior or thinking back on when they've had the behavior before, what do I think they're getting out of this? Are they doing it when I ask them to do something? Do I think they're trying to get out of what I'm asking them to do? Do I think they're trying to get something? Are they doing it because they want something? What are they getting out of it? And look at what triggers the behavior. What's happening right before the behavior? So for instance, if the behavior tends to happen when a demand's been put on them, when they've been asked to do something, when they've been asked to go somewhere that perhaps they don't want to go, and that's what tends to trigger the behavior. It's a good chance that the behavior is serving an escape function. Whereas if what tends to trigger the behavior when it tends to happen is when you're trying to get something else done and the child's supposed to be doing something independently, that's a good clue that the behavior is serving for attention. They don't have any attention, they engage in the behavior, and you have to rush over. So you look at what's triggering the behavior and again, what's happening right after it. Because if there's any pattern to what's happening right after it, if the same thing tends to happen again and again after it, that's what's reinforcing the behavior. Whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, if it's happening consistently after it and the behavior's continuing, that's the function of the behavior. So a couple clues as I mentioned. So if it typically happens when you've asked your child or your student to do something, probably, not always, but probably escape. Where if it typically happens when you're doing, trying to get other stuff done, when the child's supposed to be doing something by themselves, that's a good clue for attention. Does the behavior typically happen during transitions? I'm going to talk in prevention about transitions in general because transitions tend to be so problematic in autism. How many of you have had problems during transitions? Yeah. So I usually include it just as a special case almost. Now even in transitions, you can have, typically if it's happening during the transition, the child's doing it to escape the transition. And that can happen for different reasons. Sometimes it's because they don't want to leave what they're doing. Sometimes it's because they don't want to go where they're going. And sometimes with kids with autism, it's just that transitions in themselves, they don't like change. And it doesn't really matter whether they like what they're doing or they like where they're going. They just want to keep doing what they're doing because it's comforting to them. So that was my 3-minute condensing of a 10-week course on functional behavior assessment for you. But hopefully, again, I think especially as parents, kind of when we start thinking about it in these terms, a lot of times we're able to go, oh yeah, I totally know he's doing that because he doesn't want to have to get out of the bath, or he doesn't want to have to set the table, or oh yeah, it always happens when I'm talking on the phone. He's trying to get my attention. Okay, so that's the first key idea of positive behavior support. The second is this idea that once we know the function, we want to try to replace the behavior with an appropriate behavior that serves the same function. Again, we're going to acknowledge that this behavior is meeting a need for the child. Think of it, they're often expending a lot of energy engaging in this behavior, right? They are struggling pretty hard. Think about when they're trying to get out of something, they're putting a lot of energy into it. They're really communicating, this isn't working for me right now. I can't do this right now. And so we're at least going to acknowledge that need by teaching them an appropriate way to communicate it. So here's the big idea. If you go away with nothing else as far as replacement behaviors, keep this in mind, because this is just a cardinal rule for me with behavior, that whenever you're trying to get your child not to do something, you don't just tell them what not to do, you give them something else to do instead. You can't communicate to me by pulling my hair or scratching, but you can communicate it to me like this. So, two ways. A lot of times, many behaviors we think about trying to teach, they're trying to communicate to us. They're trying to communicate to us, I need a break, or I don't want to do this, or pay attention to me. And so what we're going to do is teach them an appropriate way to communicate that. Sometimes, I mentioned there's these self-stimulatory behaviors, or behaviors that are giving them sort of they're trying to obtain some sort of sensory input. In those cases, we try to figure out, well, we don't like what they're doing. What could I teach them that's more appropriate that would give them the same sensory need? So, for example, this was one we had with my son. He was biting the back of his hand. He would just like take it and just bite down on it hard. And at first we thought he was trying to do it to get out of everything, but we collected data on it, and we realized that he seemed to just be doing it as some sort of kind of calming. Like he'd do it when he'd get really excited. Like when we noticed that he'd do it a lot when I was really trying to play with him a lot, and he loved playing with me, but it almost was too much, and he'd kind of bite down on his hand, and it seemed to calm him. So we're like, well, he needs this biting somehow working for him, but we don't want him biting his hand. And so we started having him wear a chewy necklace, and we taught him when he'd start to go for his hand, we'd quickly grab the chewy necklace and put it in his mouth instead and have him bite down on that. So still replacing what he was getting from the chewing or the biting on his hand with something more appropriate. So here's another one. So Brian had a lot of sensory things, and when he was 4 or 5, he started coming up to me, and he would just start licking my face. And at first, because there was years when he didn't seem to know me from any other person on the street, when he started singling me out and kind of slobbering on my face, at first I was just thrilled, and like he's not doing it to anybody else, I'm special. But after a couple years of it, and I just always had all this saliva over my face, I was like, okay. So and I was thinking, okay, so how could I replace this? And it seemed like it had two functions. Since it was only me, he wasn't going and slobbering on other people's faces. There was some sort of social contact with me that he was seeking, but also just knowing Brian and his sensory needs, I think he was clearly also getting something sensory just from the oral contact. And so I was like, I know, I'll teach him to give me a kiss instead. So when he'd come up and he'd be about to slobber me, I'd try to model, and it worked. I taught him to give me a kiss. And so then it was so awesome, because he would just come up randomly and give me a kiss. And he still does that. And I'll have people, like if we're waiting in line at Costco, he'll be kind of wandering around, and every once in a while he'll come and give me a kiss on the cheek. And I'll just have people say to me kind of randomly, "You're so lucky. I wish my son would do that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." But we got it right. We were able to replace what he was getting with something more appropriate. So those are a couple sensory examples. Now let's turn to the communicative alternatives, because those are more common. So these are things that we often are trying to replace a behavior with. Things like what they're communicating is no, and we might teach them no thanks, and we'll talk about if your child's nonverbal, but think of the communication first, not how it's expressed. They're often trying to communicate no. They're often trying to communicate I need a break, I'm all done, I want to stay here, help me, pay attention to me, go away, I want that. So these are some of the most common things that I see and am trying, and we said about trying to replace their behaviors with. A couple more. I don't want to. One more minute. One more minute is one that has served me enormously well, both with Brian and with other kids. So that's the first thing, is to think about your child's behavior and think, if they could communicate this appropriately, what would they be trying to say? Now, I know, because I've lived it, that it may be what they want to say, but it may not be what we want to hear. But the way I think about it is, a typically developing child, what's one of the first words they learn? No. And at first we're thrilled, right? And we don't stop trying to get them to say no because it's inconvenient for us. It was kind of easier before they could talk, and you were the total boss. But they learn to say no, and then when they've got it, then we set about teaching them, well, there's times you can say no, and there's times you can't. But at first they can say it, and they learn the power of it. And so that's what we have to do with our kids, is first we have to give them these appropriate ways to get their needs met. And then we can set about teaching them, well, there's times you can say it and times you can't. But first we're going to acknowledge that you have this need and give you a way to communicate it. So how do you teach it? So I'll give you the story of the first time I tried this. The first time I tried this, of course, I read a couple studies about it in my studies at the UW. I was so excited because they had in these studies had taught these kids, they'd replaced their challenging behaviors with appropriate communications, and the challenging behaviors had gone down, and it was really cool, and I couldn't wait to try it. So the first behavior we decided to try it on was Brian's hair pulling. And so we were trying to figure out what the function was. We were looking at it was happening both at school and at home, and trying to figure out, so what's triggering it, what's happening after it. And one of the most common times at home that it was happening was during his bedtime routine. It was, if I wasn't really careful, it was happening almost every night. He had a bedtime routine where he'd have his bath, and then he'd get his PJs on, and then he was allowed to jump on the bed for a while. He loved jumping on the bed. He loved jumping on anything. So he'd jump on the bed, and then it was time to brush teeth. And I'd have to, it was hard to get him to attend to you, and so we'd kind of learned if we needed to get his attention, we kind of needed to get in his face. And so I'd go, grab him, stop his jumping, and say, Brian, it's time to brush your teeth. And he'd just reach out and pull my hair. And then it would also often be this big tussle to try to get him to let go of my hair, and then get him to the bathroom to brush his teeth. At school, they were seeing it. One of the common times I remember that he had a paraeducator who worked with him, and he loved going to, they had a sensory room where they had a big therapy ball, and he loved it when she would bounce him on the therapy ball. And so she's like holding him, bouncing him, so she's just totally vulnerable, because at some point she has to say, okay, we got to be all done, it's time to go back to class. And she's holding his waist, so he's got free hands to just reach out and grab her hair. Another place we were seeing it, he had a home ABA program, and On his breaks, we had this spandex hammock fixed up for him. And so again, they kind of had to get into the spandex habit. Okay, time to come back to work. He'd pull their hair. So it was pretty consistent that it was happening when he was being asked to leave something that he was liking doing and having to go to do something that he didn't want to do. So kind of, again, this was the first time I'd done this, but we kind of did what I'd read you should do. Well, what is he trying to communicate? And we decided he was trying to communicate, I want to stay here, right? In all those cases, that's what, if he could have said it instead of pulled hair, he would have said, I want to stay here. So here's what we're going to do. You look for situations where the challenging behavior typically happens. So we had it. And we decided that since I was the PhD student, I would try this first. So I would try it, work on it at night with the teeth brushing. That would be the first place. And then we'd try to do it in the other environments. And so I had the situation where the challenging behavior typically happens. So then you want to expose them to whatever's triggering the behavior, and then as quickly as you can get in and prompt with the new appropriate communication. And again, we'll talk in a minute about if the child's nonverbal, what we can do. Brian was and is somewhat verbal. You can't have a conversation with him, but we could teach him phrases, and now he's learned lots and lots of phrases, but they've all been specifically taught to him. But we could do something like I could say, I want to stay here, and he could repeat that, and he could learn that kind of as a child. So that's what I would do. So the first night that I did this, he's bouncing on the bed. I go get him, kind of lean back just in case, and say, okay, Brian, it's time to brush your teeth. Say, I want to stay here. Really quickly, before he could pull my hair, I said, say, I want to stay here. He says, he repeats it, I want to stay here. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And I just leave him. 2 minutes later, I come back. Hey, Bri, it's time to brush your teeth. Say, I want to stay here. He says, I want to stay here. I'm like, sure, okay. And he's kind of, you can just kind of see his wheels turning like, what's going on here? And then I do it again. I wait a couple minutes and I come back. Okay, Brian, it's time to brush your teeth. Say, I want to stay here. He says, I want to stay here. And I'm like, okay. And again, you can kind of seem like, well, this is kind of a good deal. I'm not sure what's going on here, but, and what was interesting to me was, again, he'd been doing a home ABA program for a number of years. We had worked on things like prepositions, thousands of trials, I don't know how many hours, never got his prepositions. We had worked on number recognition, and he just could not get the difference between 8 and 10. Seemed like no matter how many times we tried. We taught him, or I taught him, because I was working on it first, I want to stay here, in 2 nights. He learned it so quick. I mean, it was amazing considering how long other things had taught him to say. I mean, really, within 1 night, I was able to go back and say, Brian, it's time to brush your teeth. Say I. And he could just fill in, want to stay here. And then really quickly, I was just going up to him and saying, Brian, it's time to brush your teeth. And he'd say, I want to stay here. And I'd go away. So at first, this is really important. I was letting go of teeth brushing. I didn't care if we didn't brush our teeth for a week at night, or however long it took him to teach it. Don't panic, because I know you're thinking, yeah, but he's got to brush his teeth. But at first, the only thing that's important is teaching them an appropriate way to communicate. And to do that, it has to work for them. They have to get what that communication will do for them. So we also brushed his teeth in the morning, so we figured for as long as we're working on this at first, it's not going to kill him if he doesn't brush his teeth at night. And frankly, with the battles we were having getting there, there was nights that we were never brushing teeth anyway because we kind of just gave up. So pretty quickly he learned it. So that's the first thing, is you kind of want to set up these situations where you can practice it. You want to contrive these situations where they'll want to do the communication and then teach them how to do it. So, but of course, again, you're thinking, as everybody's thinking, like, and I was thinking quite honestly, okay, but I got to have him brush his teeth at some point, right? It's great that he's learned to say, I want to stay here, but how am I ever going to get him to brush his teeth? So what we decided to do, and this was kind of based on what I had been learning, was once he had learned it, and we went about a week, you know, so he had a few, 3 or 4 days where he could say it independently and was. And so I'd do like 5 or 6 times in one night. You know, I just keep going back and giving him another practice. And then, so after a week of it, we decided the rule's going to be that he gets to say, I want to stay here twice. And after that, he's going to have to go do whatever it is he needs to do. And I have witnesses, you guys, because I know it's hard to believe, but what happened was on that night that we decided to do it, I, you know, did my thing. I said, it's time to brush your teeth. He was an old hand at this point. I want to stay here. I was like, sure. And I went away, came back in a couple minutes. Bri, it's time to brush your teeth. He said, I want to stay here. Yes. And I said, okay. So then I went back the 3rd time. And I said, okay, Bri, it's time to brush your teeth. And he said, I want to stay here. And I said, no, you know what? I know you want to stay here, but you already got to stay here. Now it's time to go brush your teeth. And he just came along with me and brushed his teeth. And I have just seen that so many times. What I often teach now is 1 more minute. I've seen kids that the people will say, he won't get off the computer. It's just such a big fight. And we'll teach this child to say 1 more minute, and we'll give them a couple times to say 1 more minute, and then we'll say, you know what? You had your 1 more minute. It's time to get off. And they'll just get off with the crisis averted. I see it now with Brian in the morning, like getting him out of bed used to be horrible. And we taught him to say 1 more minute. And now the routine is I go in there and I say, Brian, it's time to get up. And he's like, 1 more minute. And I'll go away, and it's not usually exactly a minute. It's usually a couple of minutes, but I'll come back. He gets to say it twice. So we'll go through the same thing again. I'll say 1 more minute. And the 3rd time, I'll come in, I'll say, it's time to get up, and he'll say 1 more minute, and I'll say, oh, you had your 1 more minute, it's time to get up, and he gets up. And I think what's going on is first, the kids are at least able to make their opinions heard, which we all know, right? You know how sometimes just telling somebody how you feel helps even though it doesn't get you what you want? And I think they have a feeling of, if I get some control, I'm okay. I don't need all of the control. So sometimes like we'll teach, I need a break. People are always afraid to teach kids to let them say, I need a break to get out of something. They're always afraid, well, he's just going to say, I need a break all of the time. A lot of times, again, I find that if once they really believe they can say it when they need it, they don't use it all the time. They just use it when they need it. If it's really a problem, we can like have little break tickets, and they get 2 break tickets. And then you say, well, no, you already had your 2 breaks. You can't do it again. But the idea is that we're teaching them an appropriate way to communicate what they want. So once your child is reliably using the appropriate skill, and I capitalize reliably because you can't jump in and do this too fast. You can start building up their tolerance for delay by slowly delaying their access to what they wanted. So sure, you can have a break, but let's do 1 more letter first. So like if you're doing this at school, for instance, or you're trying to get them to do some work, and they've got this, I need a break down, and they're like, you ask them to do work, I need a break. Once they're good at it, you can say, well, no, how about if we just do, I hear ya. First you let them know they're heard, I hear that you need a break, but let's just do a little bit, and then you can have your break and slowly start increasing it. You already had 2 minutes, now it's time to come to dinner. You know, you've taught your child. We've had this problem before. We teach a child to get somebody's attention appropriately by tapping them on the shoulder and saying, excuse me, instead of screeching or whatever they're doing. That might be the replacement if your child's screaming for attention. You teach them to tap you on the shoulder and say, excuse me. Well, if they've learned it really good, but like you're trying to make dinner and every 2 seconds they're tapping you on the shoulder and saying, excuse me, we then start saying, well, I can see you want to talk to me, but give me 1 minute and then I'll talk to you. And then you can slowly increase it and build their tolerance. So what if your child's nonverbal? You can give them, communications don't have to be verbal. They just need some appropriate way to communicate it. You can use signs. You can use gestures. This is a great way to communicate no. You can use an augmentative device. So say you want to teach your child to ask for, or let's do I need a break. You want to teach them that when they're getting overwhelmed in a situation that they need a break. Sometimes, like, we really want them to be able to communicate this wherever they are. So sometimes we might have a picture on a retractable keychain that they can pull out. So we get them in a situation. So say we decide that we want to let them ask appropriately to leave the dinner table rather than throw food or do whatever they're doing to get out of it. So they have their I need a break card on their retractable keychain, and you have them at dinner table. They start squirming around, getting close to throwing food or whatever. You show them, pull out your picture. And it's an I need a break picture. Oh, you're showing me you need a break. Sure. Head out from the table. You can take a break. And maybe at first you want to practice it, so they get a 2-minute break and they have to come back to the dinner table. They immediately start squirming again. You prompt them to pull out their card that says I need a break. Oh, you're telling me you need a break. Okay. And they get to leave the table for a few minutes. So it doesn't have to be verbal. You can prompt them to gesture. You can prompt them to use a sign. Even when you can't replace the function, because there are times that the child may need a break, but they're sitting in the dentist's chair. The dentist is in the middle of working on their teeth. You can't give them a break. There's lots of times when we can't necessarily give them what they need. So what I found with Brian is that we systematically replaced one behavior after another with communications. We taught him, again, he can't talk normally at all, but he can say, I need help whenever he needs help. He can say, I need a break when he needs a break. He can say 1 more minute and does all the time. In fact, he somehow learned 2 more minutes, and then you say, no, it's time, your minute's up, and he'll try 3 more minutes. He doesn't get that going up is make it, but he's really learned that. So in every one of these replaced a challenging behavior. When he learned how to do that, he stopped melting, or he stopped getting aggressive, or he stopped whatever. But if you can't replace the function, you still want to be teaching the child something else to do instead. So sometimes we're just teaching them another way to tolerate frustration. We're teaching them, you can't lunge at me or break something when you're frustrated. What you can do is squeeze your hands together and take deep breaths. And we're going to teach them how to do that. We're going to give them some other physical way to hold themselves together when they're frustrated. And with these, a lot of times it's important to try to practice it before they get frustrated. So if if your child can do kind of role play, practicing what you can do when you get frustrated. Some kids, it's worked really well to teach them self-talk, to teach them, instead of melting, I can just keep saying to myself, maybe next time, if the child is verbal. Deep breaths. A lot of times I really like squeezing hands together, because you can't be squeezing your hands together and hitting somebody or destroying something at the same time. So if that's an effective strategy for them, or squeezing on something, a squeeze ball or something. But don't just tell them what to do. Tell them something else to do instead. And that's what you're going to reinforce, and you're going to try to minimize the reinforcement for the behavior. Just examples of what you might teach your child to do. So losing is a good one, where it's really hard to replace the function. What they're communicating is, I don't want to lose, right? Do any of you have kids who have real problems with losing? Yeah. So that's the one you can't really tell the other kids, if it's kids that are involved, just let him win, because that's what he's communicating with his behavior. You just have to instead teach him to deal with losing. But again, you're not just saying you don't melt down. You're teaching him something else he can do instead. So we care about the function, so we can teach an appropriate alternative, and so we can minimize, maximize. So now that you are teaching them something else to do instead, we want to maximize the reinforcement for that as much as we can, go all out in the feedback we're giving them, the reinforcement we're giving them for that. And to the best we can, we're going to try to minimize the reinforcement that they're getting for the challenging behavior. The research is clear that if you can stop the reinforcement for the challenging behavior, it will go away. But the trouble is that a lot of times we just can't. We can't always, especially as your child's getting bigger, saying, well, don't let them escape what they're trying to escape. But if they're bigger than you, just exactly how are you going to do that, right? Again, sometimes we have to give them attention. But if you know, again, what they're getting out of it, we at least try to minimize it. So if the behavior has an escape function, you at least try to reduce the possibility that the child will escape the demand. Sometimes you may not be able to, but you at least try to minimize it. If the behavior has an attention function, try to minimize the amount of attention you give the behavior. So know that giving a big response, getting really mad, is probably not the right thing to do. It's reinforcing the behavior. And the more you can minimize your response, the better. So the message you want to try to give is, the challenging behavior no longer gets you what you want or need, but appropriate behavior does. Okay, so that's the second main idea of positive behavior support, that you're trying to replace the function with something else. So now let's shift to the last big idea of positive behavior support, which is this focus on prevention rather than reaction. So there are so many, there's just this huge toolkit of prevention strategies out there. And again, I had to think about, okay, what would help you guys the most? And so I picked what I decided were the 5 biggies that I think have helped me the most, both with Brian and helping families with other kids. So the first one is shared control. So shared control kind of means a couple things to me. It means picking your battles, that deciding that some things are worth fighting, and then there's a lot of stuff that is just worth letting go. And I don't think I got that at first. I think, I thought, Brian's got special needs. He's not understanding the world. I have to be black and white. Like every time I tell him to do something, I need to follow through and make sure he does it, or he's never going to learn. And what I found was, that's not really true. That if I give a little, he's way more flexible, kind of giving in with me. One of the aha moments I had with this was with my typically developing son. I have a typically developing son who's 2 years younger than Brian. And I think David was around 6 when this happened. That David is a big reader and seemed like the moment he was born. And one day he was sitting in the family room reading a book, and I told him, David, it's time to come set the table, because it was his job to set the table. And he said, sure, but can I finish this chapter first? And I'm a big reader too, and I know, like, when you're reading a novel, how critical it is to be able to finish the chapter. And so I said, sure, and went back to working on dinner and thought, David can say that. Yeah. David can say, can I just have a little bit more time? And I'm fine with it. Brian, I tell him, you need to do something. I expect him to hop to right then. Because he doesn't have the language to say, can I just finish what I'm doing now? So this idea of not always making a battle out of it. Are any of you familiar with the book The Explosive Child by Ross Greene? Yeah. It's not necessarily a great book for kids with autism. That his approach tends to be very language-based, which often isn't good for kids with autism. But he has this metaphor that I found really valuable in it. He talks about these 3 baskets. You take all your child's behaviors, all the things you wish were different, and you put them into 3 baskets. One basket is the non-negotiables. They're the things that you have to enforce, you have to draw lines on, often because there's safety issues. So your child may not like having their hand held in the parking lot. It may be a big battle, but you have to do it. It's a non-negotiable. Then there's the middle basket of the things that we want to work on. This is something, I want to teach him to say, I want to stay here. I want to try to build his skills. I want to work on this. It's worth it to me to kind of invest the time in this. And then the third basket is I wish this wasn't true, but we are just not going to worry about it right now. He shouldn't call me stupid face, but with all the other things, that one I'm just going to ignore right now. And that was just a really valuable metaphor for me, that there's things that we just don't focus on right now. If we can get rid of it. One of the things that I remember, one of the changes I made kind of thinking about this is one of the issues we were having, especially as Brian got bigger. He would go for food wherever it was, any sort of junk food or sweet food or anything non-healthy. And he's little, you can put it on the counter. He got a little taller, you could put it at the back of the counter. Then he got taller and he could reach back there, you put it in the cupboard, and then suddenly he can get in the cupboards. And it was just this battle of him trying to get in the cupboards and get the food that he wanted, the potato chips and the Fritos. And, we ended up having one cupboard that we put a lock on. And it's just in there. It's just not an issue anymore. Yes, I'm a board-certified behavior analyst. I should and do actually know how to teach him, to ask appropriately and whatever, but it just wasn't worth fighting with at that time. There's all these other things we need to teach him. Let's just not fight that battle. So picking your battles, offering choices is another way. So you have the thing that you care about. Think about around that, what are the choices I could give for the things I don't care about? So with teeth brushing, for instance, while we did the I want to stay here, the teeth brushing itself, we were also, so my non-negotiable is he has to brush his teeth, but we got a couple different toothbrushes. Do you want the Thomas the Train toothbrush or the Disney Princess toothbrush? Do you want the green toothpaste or the bubblegum toothpaste? Do you want Mom to sing the Oh McDonald song or the Barney song? So he's got all these choices. Do you want to hold your koosh ball tonight, or do you want to hold the prickly ball? And so he's making all these choices, and kind of is then willing, he's feeling in control and is willing to let go on the one thing that I do want to control. We do that a lot with transitions. Your goal is that they transition from point A to point B, but you can ask them, do you want to, which of your toys do you want to carry with you? Do you want to hop today, or should we skip today? Would you rather walk with me, or do you want to walk with Dad? So you've got the one thing that you control, and try to come up with ways that they control the other aspects of it. Allow and teach negotiation. So this was kind of what my aha with David, like teaching them to say, can I just have 2 more minutes? And again, they don't have to be verbal. We've taught kids to hold up a finger to communicate. 1 more minute, please. So you're not giving in altogether, but you're teaching them to get a little bit more time. I want help. So they don't want to do it. If they can say, communicate, however they communicate, I want help, then okay, I'll help you, you know. You don't have to clean up the whole thing by yourself. You negotiate and I'll help you with it, or getting dressed or whatever. So the first prevention strategy is to see how you can share some control with the child. And this was just a huge one as I learned to integrate this into our day, just seeing Brian's behaviors overall go down. So don't say no, say when. This was another great one. So this is for behaviors when your child's engaging in behaviors to obtain a tangible, like they get upset because they want some food item, or they won't leave the computer, and their behavior is that they want more time on the computer. So don't say no, say when says, rather than saying no to your child, you can't have that, you say, yes, you can have that, and here's when. So you're in effect, although you're not actually saying it, saying no, you can't have it now. Instead, you're letting them know when they're going to have it in a very concrete way. So you could show if your child uses schedules or your student uses schedules, you say, no, you don't get any more computer now, but look, you have to do your math and you have recess, and then you get to do computer again. And they're like, oh, I want computer. Yeah, it's going to be great. Look, you just do math and recess and then computer. Or if you do X, or then you get Y. So this, at some point, what happened with Brian in the locked cupboard is he learned to ask appropriately, but we're getting into a kind of pattern of was he'd drag me to the locked cupboard and say, potato chips, please. And I'd say, no, you can't have potato chips now. And he'd be like, ah! And then he'd calm down, and a little while later he'd drag me to the cupboard and say, potato chips, please. And I'd say, no, it's too close to dinner. Ah! And it just seemed kind of like this constant thing of him dragging me to the cupboard, me saying no, and him getting upset. So again, this was something I read in one of my books and then couldn't wait to go home and try, and it worked. So now the idea was that I'm not going to say no, I'm going to give Brian an avenue to get what he wants. So I had all these things that I was working on with Brian. We had all kinds of chores that we were working on with him, and one of the things we were doing at the time was we were working on him emptying the dishwasher, and he was just emptying a couple plates out of it. And so Like he'd come up and say, potato chips, please. And I'd say, sure, you can have a potato chip if, and I give him something he can do. And so again, we had these chores, and so I'd say, sure, if you can empty the dishwasher, and again, we were just working on a couple plates at that time, you can have a potato chip. And he'd do his 2 dishes, and I'd give him a potato chip. I was fine with that. I was getting what I wanted, which was him doing something. We were working on him cleaning his room. He'd come up, Cheeto, please. Sure. How about if you pick up 5 shirts in your room and you get a Cheeto? Sometimes he'd decide it wasn't worth it. He'd come up, say potato chips. I'd say, yeah, sure, you can empty the dishwasher. And he's like, but I didn't care. If he didn't do it, he's the one that started the interaction. I didn't start out with, I need the dishwasher emptied. He started out with, I want a potato chip, and I was giving him a way to get it. So basically, and over time, he was always asking for this. So if every time he asked for it, I gave him something to do to earn it, I got lots of work done and practice out of him. And he was happy. We weren't having these blahs anymore because he was always being given a way to get it. The other time that this worked really nice, again, it was around food, was we had a rule that he had to finish his dinner in order to get dessert. And he really liked salty stuff, so dessert was like potato chips. And we just kind of were getting in this vicious circle again of at dinner, he'd be like, potato chips, please. And I'd say, no, you have to finish your dinner first. And he'd be like, oh! And it would happen again, a little while later, potato chips. And I'd be like, no, you don't get potato chips until you finish your dinner. And he'd get all upset. So just turning it around, and I've just used this so many times since, he'd say, potato chips, please. And I'd say, I know you get potato chips as soon as you finish your dinner. There wasn't a no in there. And I mean, how can he get upset when I didn't say no, right? And a little while later, he's, potato chips, please. I know it's going to be great. You're going to get potato chips as soon as you finish your dinner. And so what you do there is you turn yourself into their ally. Like, there's this rule out there, there's this schedule, or there's this demand, but you're on their side. Yeah, you're going to get computer as soon as you get your math done. It's going to be great. You're no longer the bad guy. You're on their side wanting them to get it, and you've told them exactly how and when they're going to get it. So that's don't say no, say when. So behavioral momentum. Anybody familiar with this concept in here? So behavioral momentum is an idea, and again, there's a lot of research on this now, that compliant behavior builds its own momentum. That if you can get a child in a compliant mood, they're more likely to be compliant next time. So the way you do this is you come up with things that quick, easy commands that your child is likely to comply with. And a lot of times there are things like, hey, Johnny, give me 5. Good job. Can you touch your head? Wow, that was awesome. Can you touch your nose? Yeah, great. Stand up. They're flopped down on the floor. And they've been doing all this from the floor, and you've built this momentum of compliance. They're like giving you a high five, touching their nose, touching their head, and then you throw in, after the series of things, high compliance commands, you throw in the one that's the problem, and the research shows that momentum will often get them to do the thing that's harder for them. So for example, Johnny, touch your nose, good job, give me 5, way to go, rub your tummy, excellent, climb in your car seat. And again, we call that a low probability request. We have these high probability of requests that there's a high probability that they'll comply with. And then the low one, you do a series of the high probability ones and then throw in the low probability one. It's been used a lot with food refusal. So you have something on their plate that they really like. Take a bite. Wow, that was great. You took a bite. Take another bite. And you're giving them the French fry here, the thing that they like. Take another bite. Wow, that was awesome. One more time. Take a bite. And then, so you've built this momentum of compliance. Wow, take a bite. And you give them a pea or whatever it is you're trying to get them to eat. And again, the research suggests that momentum will get them to the thing that they want. One of the places that I used this very successfully was getting Brian out of the bathtub, which was another one of those kind of dreaded things. He loved the bathtub. And I first have to say it took me way longer than it should have to figure out that I empty out the water before trying to get him out. But even then, he still wouldn't, he was really sensory, and he was happy to be slithering around in the tub and trying to get this wet, heavy child out of there was one of my dreaded things. And so that was one place where I'd do this. And he'd been, well trained in ABA at touching body parts and stuff. And so he was very, very compliant with touch your head, touch your tummy, touch your nose, stand up. And then as quickly as before he could kind of grasp what's going on, he'd stand up and I'm getting him out of the tub. Because once he stands up, it's okay. And it worked very successfully. People will ask, and I've actually seen that they'll say, well, does the kid kind of pick up after a while that when you start doing those that you're going to throw in something they don't like? And the answer is yes, a lot of times. So two things. You can't use it as your only strategy for everything. And then the research also suggests that you try to vary the high probability requests, the things that they're likely to comply with. Don't always do the same order, say the same commands of touch your nose, touch your head, give me 5, do the thing I don't want you to do, because they will pick it up. But definitely a good one to try here and there. Think about if you just have something that your child really doesn't like to do that you want to give that a try with. Okay, now transitions. So a number of different things that I'm going to throw out. 1 or 2 of them I'm hoping might help you with your child with transitions. So first of all, give plenty of warnings. And I think a lot of people kind of just learn this from default. So verbal warning, so not just one warning, but in 5 minutes, it's going to be time to get ready to go. Okay, in 2 minutes, it's going to be time to be all done. And so give them time to prepare. Some kids respond really well to visual timers. Like, how many of you are familiar with time timers? So a lot of you, these time timers where it shows red for the amount of time left, and as the time passes, the red goes away, and when the red goes away, it's time to be done. The time timers actually didn't work for me, for Brian, because they move at the same time as time. So like this picture here is at 10 minutes, and so it moves like a minute hand. And Brian doesn't understand clocks, doesn't understand the passage of time, and we'd say, you'll be done. We were using it when he wanted to be done with something, like we were trying to teach him to play computer. He didn't really want to, and we'd be like, you have to play till the red is gone, and he'd just be staring at it. Red is gone, and it's not going anywhere, right? Just like if you're watching the minute hand and just staring at it, it's not going. And he never understood that. But now, if you have a smartphone, like there's a lot of different apps for that, and we have ones now that will just go faster. They don't go at the passage of a minute hand. And like we use this one for Brian, what is it called? I think it's just called Visual Timer, that has lots of little squares, and they go away. So like he's learning to do a treadmill now. We're teaching a fitness routine, and there's squares constantly going away. There's a million squares, but they're constantly going away. So it's kind of more like watching a second hand go. This is called a countdown visual. So it's just a homemade something where like at 3 minutes you take away the 3, and then at 2 minutes you take away the 2. So you're just making it more concrete for your child. Remember, kids with autism have this need for sameness. It's part of the diagnostic criteria. They don't like having to change, and so we're just giving them as much time as we can to prepare for the fact that they have to change. So make sure your child understands where he or she is going. And I've had it happen so many times that people, I'm trying to help a school team or a family, and they'll say, oh yeah, he totally understands where he's going. And I say, well, just humor me. Let's try before the transition showing him a picture of where he's going. And everybody's just amazed when it just works and he makes the transition. And I don't disagree with people saying that at some level he does know where he's going, but I think that in the kind of the heat of the moment, they don't like transitions. Something's going disconnected, that they're not able to access that in their brain, and somehow this kind of tangible picture helps them to give them comfort about the predictability of where they're going. Provide a degree of control to your child over when and how the transition is made. If at all possible, let them finish what they're doing, or let them communicate 1 more minute. Ask them, and we already talked about this, do you want to, they're playing with their animals, they have to leave to go to the store. Do you want to bring an animal with you? Do you want to hold my hand or walk by yourself? Provide distractors for the transition. So you have a favorite toy or a toy that they only get during transitions. This is it's pairing something they like with something they don't like, which is transitions, and they get to carry it. When that transition to the car, which can be a really hard one, they have some object that they only get in the car, and you keep it for the transition to the car, and then they get to keep it while they're in the car. And then you kind of take it where you're going into the store or whatever, you have it, and then when it's time to transition back to the car, they get their car toy that they transition back to the car with. So arranging for something good at the other end. So for instance, when a child comes to the dinner table, which he doesn't like to do, he's not really into dinner with the family, he gets to play with a sound book, one of those books that you get to push buttons on and make noises for a few minutes before eating, or whatever it is your child likes. It's hard for them to come to the table. They don't really want to be there. They know that before they have to join the family, they get to do something they like there for a few minutes. When a child gets back in the car, there's a small treat waiting. Just to give you another story on this, a time that it just worked so well for us, I mentioned that Brian was the transition in from the backyard was really hard. He loved the backyard, and he just would flop when it was time to come in, and you just kind of have to drag him in with all his weight on your arms. And I realized, he likes being outside. He doesn't know what's going to happen when he comes inside. Sometimes it's something good. Sometimes maybe he's coming in for a snack. Sometimes it's because he's got therapy or we have to go somewhere. He doesn't know what's going to happen, and he knows what's outside is good. So if what's going to happen at the other end is unpredictable, if we can build something predictable in first, before the unpredictable thing, it can really help. So what we did with Brian was I decided whenever he comes in inside, no matter what's happening next, the first thing is he gets to have a popsicle. And that's just going to be the routine. When you come inside, you get your popsicle, and then we do the store or the therapy or whatever. And so we kind of combined things. So I started making sure I was giving him warnings. I had a picture of a popsicle, and at 5 minutes I'd be like, in 5 minutes we're going to have a popsicle. And then I came back at 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, it's going to be time for your popsicle. At 1 minute, oh, in 1 minute, we're going to have a popsicle. You know, notice I'm not saying we're going to be done backyard. I'm saying we're going to have a popsicle. And this just totally solved the problem. You know, he is totally, when it's time to come in, okay, let's go get your popsicle. For the cost of a popsicle, we avoided so many big fights getting in from the backyard. We use this a lot in schools. A lot of times I'm seeing a hard time with kids transitioning into the gen ed classroom. And I think it's very similar that a lot of times because the gen ed class is always doing something different, they don't know what's going to be happening when they get in there. And a lot of times they're pretty sure it's going to be something they don't really want to do. And so what we'll do is we'll plan, like, for the first 5 minutes after they come in, they get to do something at their desk that they really like, whether it's look at a book, whether it's color, whether it's squeeze Play-Doh or whatever. And then they have to join whatever the gen ed class is doing. But now they've got something predictable to expect, and it's something that they at least reasonably like. So there's some ideas with transitions. Hopefully one of them might kind of be something that you want to try. The last one, and with not much time to spare, modifying aversive tasks or activities. So this is huge. So the big idea of this is whenever a child's trying to escape something with me, I think, what's so bad about this that he wants to escape it? I think kids don't just come out of the womb not wanting to do things. In fact, I think people are kind of genetically predisposed to want to do things. Something's happened with this task or activity or demand that makes this child really not want to do it. Not want to do it bad enough to engage in behaviors to get out of it. Why? What is it about this task, and how can I make it less aversive? Is what we're asking them to do just too hard for them right now? That it might be where we want them to be at, but their behavior is telling us, this is just too hard for me right now, and we need to make it easier. Is it just too long that we're asking them to do something longer than they're able to do it right now? And a good indication of that is if they're willing to do whatever you're asking them to do for a while, and then they start having behaviors, that's a good clue to me that, you know, they're just not ready for what we're asking them to do. We need to make it shorter. Is it too difficult? Can I give more support up front during the task? But just thinking about what they're trying to escape and think about why is it? Again, let's assume that if they could do it, if there wasn't some mismatch between their abilities and this task, that they'd do it. And we got to figure out why it's so aversive and try to change it. So those are the 5 big ideas in prevention. The shared control, don't say no, say when, behavioral momentum, prepare for transitions, and modifying aversive tasks and activities. And the 3 key ideas of positive behavior support. So I made it with a couple minutes, and again, we can have questions for a couple minutes, and I'm willing to stay as long as people have questions. So sorry that it was kind of talk, but I just had a lot that I wanted to say. So questions? Oh, some books and resources that should be on your handout if you're interested. Yes?
I'm just thinking of one time specifically.
Oh, hold on just a sec. We're supposed to, I forgot. I was supposed to tell people.
Speak in here so people on the site, and Nancy maybe asked them
Okay, if they have questions too, yes. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I was thinking about something that happened recently with me. I had at one point let my son sit in the back seat of the car with the regular seat belt, and it worked until he decided to, while I was on the freeway, get out of the seat belt, be totally unsafe in the back. So then I moved him back to a strap-in car seat. Ever since I've done that, he tantrums every single time I put him in that car seat, and I can't reason with him that it's just not safe that I let you do the other thing.
Right.
What do you do in those huge tantrums? Like, how do I deal with this?
So first, I would put that, like, thinking of the 3 baskets that I talked about. That's kind of that basket of non-negotiable, right? So we really can't change the demand. It's not one of the situations where we can teach him to say, I don't want to, and reinforce it. We still might, I don't know how verbally is, we still might, encourage him to say, I don't want to, and say, at least he's heard. I know you don't want to, it sucks. I'd wish you could sit, in a regular seat too, but dang it, the law says that you have to sit in this. And so then I would think about, well, how can we make that less aversive to him? Is there like a car toy, something we could have that he only gets when he's in the car? And again, I don't know how much language he can understand, but I would present it as, it sucks that you have to sit in this car seat. I wish you didn't also. I'm your ally in this, but the law says it. But look, you know what? I've decided that in the car you're going to get to play with this or look at this or whatever to make it special because you have to sit in that darn car seat. And again, it would be really important that he only gets that special toy or whatever, or if it's, I don't know if it's a special snack, it depends on what your son likes, but something special that he's going to get in the car. And I would prepare him in advance, because what you don't want to do is have him start to tantrum and then bring it out. You talk about it in the house. Look at because you have to ride in that darn car seat. I hate it. The law says you have to. I wish you didn't. But look what I got, so that when you ride in the car, so that you're doing it preventatively, you're preparing, you're going to get this thing in the car, as opposed to him starting to tantrum, and then you're like, oh, I got this special toy for you. So I don't know if that gives you any ideas of something you could do. One more question from in here, and then I'll ask other sites to chime in. Yeah?
My question is about my son doing flapping. So he's very high functioning, and he's 12. And at first, in the beginning, I was like, no, don't do that when we're in public. And then it was explained to me that it feels good for him. So now we have the conversation that it's okay to do that because it makes you feel good. But how and when do you have that conversation, like when you're in public? Because you don't want him to feel like, oh, people are watching me.
Right.
Or in middle school.
Right. So a great question. So it's been interesting now, having been in the field for quite a long time, our switch in how we approach self-stimulatory behaviors. When I first started, when Brian was young, we were told, you try to stop it. You just don't let them do it. We were supposed to follow him around, not letting him flap his hands, which was an impossible task. And now we don't do that. I mean, we really think that it's serving some sort of kind of nervous system, neurological need for them. And so we tend to take one of 2 approaches. One is we really try to, especially with the higher functioning kids who are starting to care, can we come up with a way that he could still get some of that need met, but in a more appropriate way. So it's been interesting. We've done this a lot with Brian, like, because he really hand flapped, And we did things like we would put different things for him, like we just, you know, those kind of telephone cordy type things. We just had one of those on a clip on his belt, and he would just kind of twirl it down here, and he looked pretty darn normal with that. It really didn't stand out compared to other kids, and it seemed to be giving him the same input. And he didn't even, he's oblivious to kind of other people's perception of him, and a child who's not oblivious would be even more motivated to do something like that. So having, maybe brainstorming with him, I know you need to do this. Is there something we could do? Brian now, he's out in the community most of the day, and so he's actually wearing, he goes to all these different jobs and little jobs in the community. It's cool, and he wears a backpack, and we just have a strap on his backpack that he's shaking. And again, you wouldn't notice it walking down the street, you know, that he's doing that. So thinking about that, is there a way to kind of shape it into something more appropriate? So that's the big idea of replace it with, don't say you can't do this without giving them something else to do instead. We also use more of the don't say no, say when concept with the higher functioning kids, that we teach them times they can do it and times they can't, has been very successful. Like, well, when you're with the other kids in the gen ed class, you might not want to do it, but you know, if you just kind of go in the bathroom or whatever, or in a place where people aren't really watching you, you can do it for a little while. So kind of teaching them, and the kids really do learn to turn it on and turn it off. A lot of times with high-functioning kids, the parents will say, oh, something's really wrong because he comes home and he just stims like crazy. I've never seen him stimming that much. And it actually is usually often a positive sign that they've been holding it in at school because they've learned that that's not appropriate, but then it's got to come out somewhere. So, yes. So let me take a minute to poll the other sites. Is there anybody from a different site who'd like to ask a question?
Hi, I'm from the Olympia site.
Great.
Excuse me. I have a question. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I work for an autism center. And I know for me that fatigue is a huge part in my ability to function because, you know, I get tired a lot. I have to sleep a lot more than other people. I've always had trouble holding jobs in the morning, and fatigue is a huge factor on my behaviors and my functionality to work or go to school or just various activities.
Yeah.
And like, how does what you do and have learned fit into that?
I think it really fits in with positive behavior support in that we're acknowledging that people have these needs, that you get tired very easily in the morning, and though we might like you to be really productive in the morning and get a lot done, that's just not the way your body is. And so if there was, for instance, a student or a child or an adult that I was working with or helping, I would try to set up the environment so that that person or you didn't have to do a lot of demanding things in the morning. Rather than fight it and say, no, you need to get all of this done, you kind of acknowledge that need and try to change the tasks and activities so that the behaviors don't happen, that will happen if you try to push somebody who gets tired easily to do work when they're tired. Did that answer your question, or did that help?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that that was a factor, and one of the reasons that I'm doing well at the Autism Center is that I can focus how I work with my schedule of sleeping, and that's why I've been able to be a manager and stuff like that. I mean, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. Thank you for contributing that, because I feel like that fits in so much with what I believe. about kind of trying to match the person's needs with what we're asking them to do. Anybody else from the other sites? Anybody else here? Yeah.
I'm a special educator, and I work at a middle school. And I have a 12-year-old kid, a male student, who has developed his first crush. And he is having a very difficult time knowing what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And when he sees this girl, he's getting a rush, stimulated, but he spies on her, stalks her, hides behind things, and tries to find out where she lives, and is really making her feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so we've done a lot of work to try to teach him what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, but he doesn't seem to be catching on. Any suggestions for helping him?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really tough one. I've had dealt with it on numerous occasions, and sometimes so it's definitely the approach of not only teaching them what not to do, but what to do instead. I mean, and it sounds like you're trying that. With some students, we've had some success of trying to build structured interactions with that other person that kind of both sides know what to expect, that can be successful. Sometimes it just hasn't worked, we've needed to say you just can't interact with that person. But as far as appropriate, I don't know how you've tried to teach what you've tried to teach. We've had success with video modeling where we're showing them, I don't know if you've tried that, but video modeling is something that's proving to be a really effective way of teaching kids with autism, where they're watching somebody on a video interacting in the way we want them to interact, and that can be successful. That you're showing videos of a boy interacting in appropriate ways with a girl, social stories, trying to explain how the other person might feel when the student is doing the inappropriate things, and how they'll feel if they do the appropriate things, and as well as kind of just the standard prompting, and certainly reinforcing them, making sure you have really systematic reinforcement for acting in appropriate ways. And I don't know if you've tried all those things, and you just kind of have to keep working on it. But it's definitely can be a difficult one. Sometimes you just wish you could remove that other person from the environment, and get rid of it, but often you can't. So. Yeah.
Just add one thing, just to plug something that, one of our future autism classes, Karen Toth, who's one of the psychologists at the Autism Center, in September is going to be talking about relationships and puberty and sexuality, which is obviously a big topic for a lot of our kids. So just mark your calendar for that one.
Good. Anybody else? Feel free to, if you need to leave, feel free to just get up and leave. I won't be offended, because I know that people need to get home, but again, I'm willing to also stay if people have questions. Yeah.
Okay, I've tried the if you do X, then you get Y with my son. Mm-hmm. And he's 9 years old, and he's high-functioning autism. And when he hears that, he ends up melting down, because he really wants what Y is, and he really doesn't want to do what X is. How do you handle that?
So the first thing is that the X can't be perceived by them as undoable. And sometimes what we've established is first you have to do this to get that. What we've established is just too big. And so then they perceive it as aversive, like that's the same as saying I'm never going to get this. And so like when I mentioned when I started this with Brian, to get his potato chip, at first all he had to do was take one plate out of the dishwasher. So I would, and because your son, it sounds like now kind of has this history that he thinks, oh, when they say this, it's going to be horrible and I can't do it. You're going to need to go back to really easy things at first. I mean, it's going to have to be really small what you ask him to do. It's going to have to be so small that it's going to be like, well, I could melt, or I could just, you know, touch my nose 3 times, or whatever you ask them to do, just so that he gets used to hearing first X, then Y, and not perceiving it as a really hard thing. That it's really not a hard thing, it's a really easy thing, and then slowly you can start building up what you're asking him to do before getting it. And again, if he starts having problems again, it means that you push too hard, and what you're asking him to do is just too hard for where he's at right now.
Half the time it's just for his homework, and it's usually math, and he loves doing math. So it's sort of frustrating sometimes because you know he likes doing the X, but yet he won't do it to get the Y. So
interesting. I don't know. I mean, even if he likes doing math, I still wonder if what he's being asked to do is too big or too hard for him. Even if he likes it, I don't know how much math. I mean, I wonder if you really said you need to do 3 math problems and then you get Y. Would he really melt down, or would he be like, ah, that's really not bad? Whereas when you're saying you need to do your math, and he again, even if he likes it, it's a lot. He just perceives it as too big of a hurdle to get to what he wants. I don't know for sure.
yeah, I know he gets bored doing math because he gets bored doing the same stuff over and over and over again because he learns it so quick. So.
Right. So, I mean, again, he may perceive I have to do this, even though he kind of likes it, I have to do this big, boring thing, and I'd rather melt than do that. You gotta change it at first, that it's easier to just do what I asked you than melting.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah.
To piggyback on the homework situation,
Yeah.
we have a deaf, nonverbal, autistic 9-year-old, and homework in general is a dreaded task.
Yeah.
And he will shut his eyes. He will melt down. You don't have to say anything to him. He has cochlear implants, but once he starts crying, you can't talk because he can't hear you. And reading is so hard. And we don't know what to offer him. Anything that we offer him is not good enough to get this done. I mean, he would sit there for an hour and cry himself to collapse rather than to read 3 sentences.
To redo it. And I kind of think about it like I always wanted to be a gymnast. I had this secret desire to be an Olympic gymnast. But nobody taught me how. And reinforcement alone won't do it. Like I really wanted to be a gymnast. But you could have offered me an Olympic gold and $1 billion to do a triple flip, and I couldn't have done it. It would, even though everything, the best reinforcer in the world was there, I still can't do a triple flip. You know, there's no, if what we're asking the child to do is perceived by them to be too hard, the best reinforcer in the world's not going to get them to do it. It's just too much of a mismatch between where at least they feel they're at and what we're asking them to do. So it sounds to me, and again, I always think this, when a child's expending a lot of energy in escaping something, that kids, again, aren't born not liking to do homework. Why does this child hate doing homework? It's because they're perceiving it as too hard. And it might be where we want them to be right now, but it's just not where they're at. And especially homework. I mean, homework's not supposed to be really hard. Homework's supposed to be practice of things you already know. And so I obviously don't know the situation, but I would want to go back especially once you have kind of this pattern of behavior around homework, I want to go back to trying to convince your child that homework is not aversive. It's not too hard. It can be fun. I'd go back to doing something fun during homework for a while. And then when you're not having behaviors during fun stuff, okay, we're going to read one word and then we're going to do the fun stuff. And that's my feeling on it, that again, if your child's having this type of response, they're communicating to you that I can't do this right now. So.
Well, he goes to a special deaf school, and they have requirements on homework time that, as parents, they make us sign at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And they require these little second graders and first graders to do 45 minutes to an hour and 20 to 30 minutes of reading. And we scale it back as best we can, still helping him to learn. He can read the words. Like, he had this meltdown that lasted an hour, and he just collapsed to the floor. We got him calmed down. We gave him cookies and milk, and he sat at the table, and boom, he read the whole rest of the page without any help.
Yeah.
And I was like, where'd this come from? But hard, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
Reading is hard.
And negotiating with the school, you know, can I read to him? You know, especially in the evening, and he's 9.
Well, and he's cognitively delayed. So.
Right. So I'm tired and don't do my best work in the evening, and asking him to do something really hard, to me, that's just going to teach him to hate reading.
Well, and he travels at least an hour home if traffic's good, up to 2 hours if traffic's bad.
So I personally, again, it's my opinion, I'd negotiate with the school. Either we don't do homework, or, again, could reading to him be a good substitute? I mean, getting him to love books would be a really good thing, right? And so I think you reading to him could be just as valuable as having, well, way more valuable than having meltdowns over reading.
Well, and homework was becoming unproductive.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So that would be my
Okay.
take on it, that
Thank
he
you.
is communicating to you that this isn't working for me, and we need to hear that and try to adjust it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Anybody else? Yeah. Thank you all that are leaving. Thank you for coming. Yeah. Yeah, somebody at another table. Yep.
We're here at Providence in Everett, and I have a parent with a question regarding toilet training.
Okay.
I have a 6-year-old, mildly autistic daughter that she seems to function with most things really well, but when it comes to potty training, she's on the level of a baby. I mean, I'm still getting up in the middle of the night and changing poopy diapers. I mean, and she doesn't seem to have a fear of the toilet or her potty chair that she's had since she was 2. I can't figure out what it is, but she refuses to go to the toilet, and they've been working at her. She's in kindergarten, and they've been working with her at school, and she just refuses to even go in her diaper at school. She just holds it till she gets home. And I have tried everything. And I think it's also getting to the age where, like, a lot of the strategies they have for toilet training is geared towards, like, a 2 to 3-year-old, and a lot of that stuff just doesn't work with a 6-year-old or a child that's almost 6.
Yeah. So you're not going to like my answer, and having a child who got potty trained when he was like 9 or 10, I totally understand the urgency you feel. But when you think of that concept of shared control, I mean, one of the few things that our kids have ultimate control over is their bowel movements, right? Or their peeing and pooping. That's something we cannot prompt. And so when I hear somebody say we've been, trying everything, and they've been trying at school, and everybody's been working on it, and it's not working, it starts to feel like there's just kind of a control, a power struggle going on with her. And often what you have to do at that time is just take a break from it and let the power struggle. What was that?
Oh, sorry.
I have pretty much given up.
Yeah.
I just changing diapers.
Okay, good. And believe me, I understand what that's like with a 6-year-old changing poopy diapers. And it's not forever, but just to kind of let stuff, let things settle for a while. Let the power, just do not make an issue out of it for a while. Everybody at school too. And then kind of in 6 months, try again, making sure, I would not make it about going to the bathroom. That's the thing you can't control, but trying to make sitting on the potty a fun thing at first. Again, 6 months from now when things have kind of settled down, and trying to figure out, we've let kids watch videos in front of the potty, listen to music, anything that can relax her and let her feel like the sitting on the potty is not an aversive thing. And making sure you've addressed the sensory, because there can be a lot of sensory things around the bathroom. There can be just sitting on the toilet feeling kind of out of control, making sure she's got something to put her feet on. Sometimes a padded seat makes them feel more stable, kind of considering whether there's other noises in the bathroom or the lighting is bothering her. Maybe sometimes turning off the lights if you can have some natural light so it's not pitch dark in there. But just first focusing when you reintroduce it just on making it a pleasant, relaxing place, not worrying about whether at first she's pooping or peeing. It's just she's doing a great job sitting on the toilet. And work on that for a while without making an issue about whether she's actually peeing or pooping there.
Okay.
So sorry about that one. It's a hard one. But
Thank you.
But it's definitely the one power struggle that they will win. So that's why you just can't make it a power struggle. Yeah. So is this the school's pressuring? Because I often see it the other way, that the school doesn't want the bother of potty training, so they're often happy to keep the child in a diaper, especially if they're saving the poop for home. But you're interested in the other way, negotiating points with the school if I would say what I just said, I don't know if it convinced you, but this idea of it becomes a power struggle, and it's a power struggle that the child will always win. We cannot control their pooping and peeing, and the only way to let that power struggle abate is to just take a break for a while. Did you want to weigh in on it?
Can autism kid go travel for 24 hours?
What?
Can autism kid, my kid is 5 years old,
Uh-huh.
can they travel for 24 hours?
Without peeing or pooping?
With family, but like they easy to screaming, and then 24 hour like during nighttime, and I'm afraid like I don't know what's she gonna do in the public. She tantrum, she may lay down the bed and may screaming and go back to another country.
So this isn't about toilet training anymore. It's something different.
Not toilet.
Okay, so your child's behavior is screaming, and you're wondering what to do about it.
Yeah, if she go
On a trip, so like on an airplane ride.
Yeah.
Okay, so what to do on an airplane ride? You're worried about her screaming and
not listening.
not listening. Well, it's a it's a big issue that I can't necessarily solve all of it, but definitely thinking about special things that she can have on the plane that she doesn't get anywhere else, you know. That's the time to not worry about healthy food, to just be willing to let her have whatever treats, whatever she likes doing. You have new and different ones that she's going to get to do on it. You can talk to your pediatrician. Sometimes they can recommend medications that can kind of just take the edge off, that can relax the child, make them more sleepy, which can make a plane trip. Right. So, but a lot of times the doctor can give you advice about like crushing it and mixing it with ice cream or pudding or something, ways to hide it.
She doesn't know how to eat ice cream.
Oh, what does she know how to eat?
Only 5 things in her life.
Only 5 things, so that will be hard. So, I mean, it's gonna be hard on the plane. Again, I don't have any magic cure, magic suggestion other than those, trying to have things that she can do on the plane that she likes, and trying to, I mean, maybe you can try to, if you can't use medication to make her sleepy, trying to, bring her on the plane sleepy to up the likelihood.
So the doctor has to put the needle on her.
Oh, on her, yeah. So it's going to be tough. Anybody else? Yeah.
I have a daughter that has ADHD.
I can try. Yeah, a lot. So first, like, most of this stuff that I've talked about applies to kids with any disabilities, and frankly, typically developing kids also. All of these things work well. So
So it's similar to the question the lady had about homework.
yeah.
She's in general ed, but it's so hard for her. She's supposed to read a book about Greek mythology, and it was like the one we could find was like 400 pages, and she just was avoiding that whole book. And the tutor, who she'll work for some, but she won't really work for me, suggested her seeing the movie, The Lightning Thief. So she saw the movie, and then she was able to pass the test on the computer. The book, can't remember what it was called, but the test that she had to take. So now she doesn't want to read the book at all. And, how can you blame her? It's so hard. She doesn't comprehend what she's reading. If you try to read it to her, she still doesn't really comprehend it. What do you do as a parent, where, it's basically cheating, but the task is so, I
think that's where you have to advocate for your child with the school. And is she on an IEP?
No, she's a 504.
Okay. I mean, so with without it written down, negotiating that it's okay to watch the movie instead of read the book. I mean, what is the goal of the task? Is it to read 400 pages, or is it to understand something about Greek mythology? And she was able to pass the test, so I'm assuming it was about understanding Greek mythology. And I know, because I have a child myself, how wearing it can get to be constantly advocating and negotiating with the school. But it's kind of what you have to do, because again, we can't get water out of a stone. You can have the biggest reinforcer in the world, and it's not going to get your child to read a 400-page book if reading a 400-page book is too hard for them. It's just not. There's no answer to that. They're just not going to be able to. And so we have to put our energies into making sure they're not being asked to read a 400-page book, rather than in trying to hammer it, our child through it.
The concern is that if you hammer it and she force it, she's going to absolutely hate school.
Yes, and hate reading, which is the last thing you want. So that, to me, why spend your time trying to change the child's behavior in that case? It's not about the child, it's about the task, and we need to change the task. I'm a big believer in that usually it's the task that needs to change, not the child. So, yeah, and especially something like ADHD, it's not so obvious. They perceive the child sometimes as being more competent than they are. So, yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
So a few months ago, well, let me back up. About 4 months ago, our youngest son, he had ended up climbing out of his crib or falling out of his crib this past summer. And I was like, okay, no more crib, because we couldn't put the sides down. I was like, now it's time for a toddler bed. So, for a while there, we were not getting him to stay in the toddler bed. And so we would eventually get him to stay in the toddler bed, or we would just put him in the bed after he'd fall asleep, and we would put a gate across the doorway, because we live in a duplex, and I was always afraid of him falling down the stairs.
Yeah.
And so he's figured out how to pry the gate away from the door frame. Well, we rent, so we can't mount anything to make it more stable. So I was like, okay, well, to be on the safer side, let's just bring him to the bed. Now we can't get him out of our bed. So how do we reverse this to where he's sleeping back in his own bed again and not taking over our king-size bed?
Yeah. So what we do with that, so you think what they're trying to obtain, so you think about the function of his behavior. He's trying to obtain getting into your bed with you guys. And so, and having, again, a child who had horrible sleep problems, this is yes, thank you, the hardest one, because it usually means a lot more work on your part at the start, which is, you're just tired and you want to go to bed. That's how they get reinforced, right? Because you can fight it and put them back in their bed, or you can just have them in your bed and go to sleep. So the short term, you're getting reinforced too, right? So what you have to do is, they don't get it. So every time he comes out, you don't give him any attention. You just carry him back to his bed. He comes out again, you carry him back to his bed. And this is called extinction, when you stop reinforcing something that's been reinforced. So he's been getting reinforced, he comes and he gets to stay in your bed, and you're stopping that with, really, you're not talking, comforting to him, you're just putting him back in his bed. You're hardly making eye contact with him. And the thing to know about extinction, when you stop reinforcing something that's been reinforced, it gets worse before it gets better. And what happens a lot of times is it gets worse and people give up because they just can't handle it. So he's gonna, the first few nights, he's gonna come out a lot. But if you just keep doing it, you don't make a big deal out of it, you just take him back and plop him down, he will stop coming out after a while. Now you can help it by trying to make his bed as reinforcing as you possibly can, is one thing you can do. So think about, what else could you put in there? Is there a special pillow you could get? I don't know, my son just got this light up pillow at Bed Bath & Beyond. He just loves it. You push on it and it lights up. Something, something to make that more special. Another thing you can do to help ease the pain, and they've done studies on this, is keep him up a lot later than you normally would. So he's really tired. It's kind of called the sleep deprivation. You keep him up quite a bit later than you normally would to make it that much more likely that he's going to fall asleep sooner. And then you gradually bring his going to bed time slowly back to where it was. But he started to have this pattern because he was so exhausted that he just went to sleep. And then he had every night that he sleeps in his bed, you've got one pattern established, and you try to get that. So those are kind of the approaches we take, but it's hard because I know you're so tired. You're probably tired because he's been sleeping in your bed in the first place. You haven't been getting good sleep, and then I'm proposing you get even less sleep, and it's hard. So a lot of times, like when you're gonna try something like this, if there's any way like you can get some help or some way that like you can take a nap during the day, somebody can spell you during the day so you can get some sleep to try to, because the worst thing that could happen is that you try it for a couple nights, you're just exhausted, and then on that third night you just can't handle it anymore and you give in, because then you've just wiped out all that work you did because he just got reinforced again, and now he's going to be like, if I just keep coming, it's finally going to work. And so once you commit to it, you just got to stick with it. So any support you can have to help you do that, have it lined up beforehand. So anybody else? Thank you guys for sticking around as long as you did. Okay, thank you. Hope it was helpful. Good.